Ever thought a terrible night could change your life? Watch how a waiter named Max became famous for his brutal honesty towards Snoop Dogg and the wild journey that unfolded from there. Don't miss out. Subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below to dive into this surprising story. The rain softly struck the windows of Serenity Eatery, a discreet yet elegant restaurant in the heart of Los Angeles. The establishment, with its cream-colored walls and dim lighting, was a refuge for those looking to escape the city's hustle and bustle. The aroma of freshly baked bread mixed with subtle notes of fresh herbs and melted butter filled the air. Snoop Dogg ran his hand over his face, trying to shake off the exhaustion that had piled up over the past week. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed countless sleepless nights spent working on his latest album and managing his business ventures. His phone kept vibrating in the pocket of his worn jeans, but for the first time that day, he decided to ignore it. Just one night, he murmured to himself as he pushed open the heavy wooden door of the restaurant. One night without being Snoop Dogg. The hostess, a young woman named Lily, with blonde hair tied into an immaculate bun, barely glanced at him. His black sweater, which had seen better days, and his faded jeans didn't suggest he was the usual type of customer for the establishment. "Table for one?" she asked, flipping through the reservation book with little interest. "Yes, preferably something away from the windows," Snoop replied, mentally thanking her for not recognizing him. In the kitchen, Max, who was 28 years old, was polishing a wine glass as he listened to his coworkers' complaints. Having spent nearly a decade working in restaurants, and the last 3 years at Serenity Eatery had been particularly challenging. "Did you see the guy who just walked in?" Anna, one of the waitresses, commented while picking up an order. "He looks like he got lost on the way to a fast food joint." Max glanced through the kitchen door. "The guy at table 15? That's my section. Great. Another one here to occupy a table for hours just to order a salad and tap water." The night had started poorly for Max. Earlier, his mother had called to tell him she needed another expensive treatment, and the insurance refused to cover it. The bills were piling up, and his younger brother depended on him to help with his high school expenses. "Chef Ron is in a terrible mood," Jake, another waiter, warned as he entered the kitchen. Someone criticized his risotto on Yelp. Max adjusted his black apron and reviewed his notepad. Table 15 would be his 6th of the night, and it wasn't even late yet. He headed over, practicing his professional smile, even though inside he felt like the world was collapsing. As he walked to Snoop's table, he noticed the customer's relaxed posture and the weary look in his eyes, reminding him of his own struggles. "Good evening," Max's voice interrupted Snoop's thoughts. "I'm Max, and I'll be your waiter tonight. Can I get you something to drink while you review the menu?" Snoop looked up from his phone, where he had just read yet another negative headline about himself. "A whiskey, neat, please. Whatever you have." Max narrowed his eyes slightly. The restaurant was known for its extensive wine list and French cuisine, not spirits. "We have Glenlivet 18-year-old for $145 a shot," he replied, with a tone that suggested his client might want to reconsider. "That's fine," Snoop murmured, returning to his phone. Max walked away, muttering under his breath about customers who didn't even appreciate where they were dining. At the bar, Sophia waited with a mocking smile. "Your table 15 seems fascinating," she joked while preparing a martini. "He could at least pretend he knows where he is," Max replied. "Did you see how he's dressed? This isn't a diner." At his table, Snoop was aware of the staff's glances and murmurs. He found it almost amusing. After weeks of constant adulation and people trying to impress him, there was something refreshing about being treated like a nobody. The restaurant began to fill up. A couple celebrating their anniversary took the table next to his, the man in an impeccable suit, the woman in a dress that likely cost more than Max's car. At another table, a group of entertainment executives animatedly discussed their latest project. Max returned with the whiskey, setting it on the table with less care than necessary. A few drops splashed onto the white tablecloth. "Are you ready to order?" he asked, his pen tapping rhythmically against the notepad. Snoop closed the menu. "What do you recommend?" The question seemed to irritate Max further. "Everything on our menu is excellent," he replied dryly. But maybe you'd like to start with something simple, like the soup of the day. It's more accessible. Accessible? Snoop raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the barely veiled audacity of the waiter. Yes, $15. Max emphasized the price as if speaking to a child. The lobster bisque is market price, which today is significantly higher. A message lit up Snoop's phone. Another problem with his label. He ignored it, finding the waiter's attitude strangely entertaining. "I'll have the foie gras to start," Snoop said, pronouncing foie gras in a way that made Max visibly wince. "And then the filet mignon, medium rare." Max couldn't help himself. "Are you sure? Foie gras is quite sophisticated. It's not for everyone's palate." At the next table, the anniversary couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. The waiter's attitude was clearly inappropriate, but Snoop seemed almost amused. "I'm sure," Snoop replied simply. "And a bottle of wine. What do you suggest?" Max looked at Snoop's worn sweater and then at the wine list. "We have a pretty basic Merlot for $50. Probably more suitable for your budget." "Bring me the Chateau Lafite Rothschild 2010, Snoop responded, naming one of the most expensive wines on the list without even glancing at it. Max paused slightly. "Sir, that wine costs $2,500 a bottle. Perhaps you should." "The bottle will be fine," Snoop interrupted, returning to his phone. Max walked away, muttering under his breath about a customer trying to pretend to be what they weren't. In the kitchen, he shared the story with his coworkers. "I bet his card gets declined," Sophia laughed. "Remember the guy last month who tried to impress his date and ended up washing dishes?" As the night progressed, Max grew bolder in his condescending remarks. When Snoop mispronounced Bordeaux, Max corrected him with barely disguised disdain. When Snoop asked for ketchup for his $120 steak, Max practically had to restrain himself from rolling his eyes. "You know," Max said while clearing the dessert plate, "next time, there's a lovely place nearby called Burger King. I think you'd feel more comfortable there." The diners at nearby tables held their breath, expecting an outburst of anger that never came. Instead, Snoop gave a slight smile and pulled out his phone, seemingly to record something. The rain outside had intensified, and occasional thunder provided a dramatic backdrop to the scene about to unfold. Max had no idea that his life was about to take a radical turn. For now, however, he was just another grumpy waiter at a luxury restaurant trying to survive another night. In the kitchen, the staff placed bets on whether the customer at table 15 would be able to pay the bill. None of them imagined they were witnessing the beginning of a story that would soon become legendary at the restaurant. The night was drawing to a close, and Max prepared the bill with a mix of anticipation and disdain. The total came to over $3,000, a sum he was sure would create an awkward moment. As he walked toward table 15, he mentally rehearsed what he would say when the card was declined. But that revealing moment would have to wait until the next chapter of this story. For now, Max remained simply a waiter who had dared to treat one of the most iconic figures in music with disdain, without the slightest idea of who he really was. The atmosphere in the restaurant had subtly shifted. The diners at nearby tables, initially absorbed in their own conversations, were now discreetly paying attention to the interaction between the arrogant waiter and the seemingly humble customer at table 15. "Excuse me," Snoop called out to Max as he passed by with a tray of desserts for another table. "Could you bring me another whiskey?" Max let out an exaggerated sigh. "Are you sure you wouldn't prefer a glass of water? It's on the house." An executive at the neighboring table nearly choked on her wine upon hearing the remark. Her dining companion looked at her with a mix of amusement and embarrassment. "The whiskey will be fine," Snoop replied, who had begun to find an odd pleasure in the situation. It was the first time in months that someone treated him without any kind of flattery or fear. In the kitchen, Anna intercepted Max as he prepared the order. Max poured the whiskey with a dismissive gesture. "Did you see how he holds his utensils? Like he's never eaten in a fine dining place before. And he ordered the foie gras just to show off. He didn't even know how to appreciate it properly." "Even so," Anna bit her lip, "there's something about him that feels familiar." "Yeah, He looks like every wannabe artist who comes here pretending to be the next big thing, Max replied, adding sarcastically, I'm sure he has a revolutionary album in his garage. Meanwhile, Chef Ron had discreetly peeked out from the kitchen to observe the customer at table 15. His expression oscillated between professional indignation at the ketchup request and barely concealed curiosity. Sacre bleu, he muttered. How does someone order Chateau Lafite and then pair it with ketchup? Sacre crime. The manager, Mr. Thompson, who had been observing the situation from afar, finally decided to approach Snoop's table. There was something about the customer that gave him an uneasy feeling, as if he was missing something obvious. Good evening, sir, Mr. Thompson said with a professional smile. Is everything to your liking? Snoop looked up from his phone. Everything's excellent, especially the service. It has a unique touch. Mr. Thompson noticed the amused glint in the customer's eyes and felt his unease grow. I'm glad to hear that. If there's anything you need... Actually, Snoop interrupted, could you prepare the chocolate souffle? I noticed it takes about 20 minutes. At that moment, Max was returning with the whiskey. The souffle is quite sophisticated, he commented, ignoring Mr. Thompson's warning look. Perhaps ice cream would be more appropriate for your palate. Mr. Thompson held his breath, expecting a complaint that never came. Instead, the customer smiled and said, the souffle will be fine, and perhaps you could explain to me what makes it so sophisticated. For the first time that evening, Max was momentarily at a loss for words. The customer's calm demeanor and apparent amusement unsettled him more and more. At the table celebrating their anniversary, the husband leaned toward his wife and whispered, that guy must be someone important. No one stays this calm under such terrible service unless they're used to handling much more intense situations. The woman nodded discreetly, studying the customer at table 15. There's something about the way he sits, the way he observes everything. He's not an ordinary diner. The rain outside had ceased, but the fogged-up windows created an intimate atmosphere in the restaurant. Most diners had begun to leave, leaving only a few tables occupied, including Snoop's. Max was preparing the check with a mix of anticipation and disdain. $3,478.85. It was more than he earned in a month. As he walked toward table 15, his mind replayed every interaction of the night, every sarcastic comment, every condescending glance. If you need me to explain the numbers, Max began, placing the check on the table. That won't be necessary, Snoop replied, pulling a black card from his worn wallet. For a moment, Max stared at the card. It was different from regular credit cards, heavier, with a minimalist design. But that moment of recognition would have to wait until the next chapter because, for now, Max was still just a proud waiter who had spent the night belittling someone without realizing he was about to receive the surprise of his life. The restaurant was nearly empty now, creating a more intimate atmosphere that amplified every comment and gesture. Would you like to see the wine list again? Max asked, his tone laden with irony as he held out the iPad displaying the digital selection. I can show you the wines by the glass. They're more manageable. Snoop, who had been discreetly adjusting the position of his phone on the table, nodded with an enigmatic smile. Why don't you surprise me? Something that pairs well with the souffle. The response momentarily unsettled Max. It wasn't the defensive reaction he had hoped to provoke. At the bar, Anna polished glasses, increasingly intrigued by the dynamic between the waiter and the peculiar customer. Max, Anna whispered as he approached the bar, doesn't this seem off to you? He's way too calm about your attitude. Probably doesn't even understand that I'm insulting him, Max replied, selecting a bottle of Sauternes with a touch of malice. These entertainment guys live in their own little bubbles. In the kitchen, Chef Ron prepared the souffle, muttering in French about customers who didn't appreciate haute cuisine. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Here you go, Max said, returning to Snoop's table with a glass of golden wine. A Chateau Sauternes, though you might find its flavor a bit complex. Snoop took the glass and examined it with genuine interest. Interesting choice. What made you pick a Sauternes? The question, asked with evident knowledge, made Max hesitate for a second. At a nearby table, a group of entertainment executives, who had been observing the interaction for the past hour, exchanged meaningful glances. One of them discreetly pulled out his phone and began typing something. Sophia, one of the executives, called to the bartender, "Is that waiter always like this with customers?" Anna, wiping down the bar, shook her head. Max is usually very professional. Something about this customer has him especially inspired tonight. The screen displayed several notifications from social media about his latest controversy, but he ignored them, opting instead to open a voice recording app. "Mind if I record some work notes?" Snoop asked Max as he returned to check on the souffle. "The atmosphere here is very inspiring." "Oh, are you working on the next big album?" Max responded, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Another revolutionary track? Or maybe something in cannabis?" Snoop suppressed a smile as he adjusted his phone. "Something like that. It's always helpful to document interesting experiences." In the kitchen, Chef Ron was finishing the decoration on the souffle when Mr. Thompson approached with a worried expression. "Ron, doesn't the customer at table 15 look familiar to you?" The chef paused, studying the customer through the kitchen window. "Mon Dieu, there's something familiar about him, but it can't be who I'm thinking of. That guy wouldn't come alone and dress like that." Max returned to the kitchen to collect the souffle, catching the tail end of the conversation between Mr. Thompson and Ron. "What are you two staring at?" he asked, adjusting his apron. "Max," Mr. Thompson began cautiously, "have you noticed anything particular about the customer at table 15? Other than his complete lack of class and his pretense of being more sophisticated than he is?" Max replied, taking the plate with the souffle. "He's your typical Hollywood wannabe who thinks he can buy sophistication with a credit card." Mr. Thompson tried to say more, but Max was already heading to Snoop's table with the dessert. On his way, he passed Anna, who stopped him briefly. "Max, one of the executives at table 6 just showed me something on his phone," she whispered urgently. "I think you should." "Not now, Anna." Max interrupted. "I need to serve this souffle before it deflates." Reaching Snoop's table, Max placed the dessert down with an exaggerated flourish. "Your souffle, do you need me to explain how to eat it? It's quite a bit more sophisticated than a Starbucks brownie." Snoop, who had been discreetly recording with his phone, angled it slightly to better capture the moment. "Please enlighten me. I'm always eager to learn." The response, once again devoid of the irritation Max expected, left him momentarily puzzled. He had been provoking the customer all night, and instead of getting angry, Snoop seemed increasingly amused. At the bar, Anna was hyperventilating after seeing what the executive had shown her on his phone. Mr. Thompson whispered discreetly, pointing toward table 15. "Do you know who that customer is?" Before Mr. Thompson could answer, Max returned to the bar, shaking his head in disbelief. "Can you believe he just asked me about the physics of why a souffle rises, like he actually cares about the science behind it?" Max scoffed. "Anna," he interrupted urgently, "there's something you need to know." But Max had already turned away, responding to a gesture from Snoop requesting more wine. On his way back to the table, he stopped briefly at the service station to check his phone. He had 3 messages from his sister. "Max, are you watching the news? Answer me, this is important. Please tell me you're not being yourself tonight." He ignored the messages, assuming it was some family drama, and continued to Snoop's table with the wine. "You know," Max began as he poured, "it's refreshing to see someone pretend so much interest in gastronomy. Most entertainment guys who come here just want to show off how much they can spend." Snoop took a sip of wine, studying Max over the rim of his glass. "And what makes you so sure I'm pretending?" "Oh, please," Max scoffed. "I've been in this business for 10 years. I can tell the difference between someone who genuinely appreciates fine dining and someone who's just trying to keep up appearances. The way you hold your utensils, how you pronounce French names, the fact that you asked for ketchup with a prime steak. It all screams new money, trying to fit in." At nearby tables, several diners held their breath, torn between disbelief and morbid fascination. The group of entertainment executives had stopped pretending they weren't listening, and one of them was discreetly filming the scene. 10 years is a long time," Snoop commented. adjusting his phone again on the table. You must have seen all kinds of customers. Oh, absolutely, Max replied, oblivious to Anna's desperate attempts to get his attention from the bar. But you entertainment guys are my favorite category. Always so sure you're changing the world with your music and cannabis ventures. Snoop tilted his head, genuinely intrigued. And what do you think about the music industry? Huh? Max couldn't suppress a mocking laugh. Like the rap scene? Please. Snoop Dogg is just another celebrity playing the legend card. At least he knows how to dress appropriately for dinner. Max's voice trailed off as realization began to dawn. Something about the amused expression on his customer's face. The way he had mentioned Snoop Dogg, the phone recording on the table, a chill ran down his spine. At the bar, Anna had buried her face in her hands, unable to keep watching the unfolding disaster. Mr. Thompson had started walking toward table 15, but stopped when he saw that Max was finally putting the pieces together. Max swallowed hard, his mind racing through every sarcastic comment and condescending gesture he had made that evening. Excuse me, sir, but you're not. But that realization, that moment of horrified understanding, would have to wait until the next chapter. For now, Max stood frozen next to the table as the weight of his actions began to crash down on him like an avalanche in slow motion. The night that had started with the waiter's arrogance was about to take a turn that would change his life forever. The silence that followed was deafening. The few diners still remaining in the restaurant had stopped pretending not to observe the scene. The group of executives had placed their phones on the table, recording every moment. Even Chef Ron had peeked out from the kitchen, his white hat visible through the service window. Sir, Max felt his legs turn to jelly, his mind replaying every scathing comment he had made throughout the evening on an endless loop. Snoop raised a hand, cutting off what was sure to be a stammering apology. You were saying something about legends? Max's face had gone pale. His throat was so dry he could barely speak. I didn't know. I never imagined that the icon Snoop Dogg might dine alone and in jeans. Snoop finished the sentence with a faint smile playing on his lips. As he adjusted his phone one last time, he said, You know what's most interesting? This is the first honest conversation I've had in weeks. No flattery, no hidden agendas, just brutal honesty. Max blinked, confused, his brain still trying to process the situation. You're not angry? Snoop let out a small laugh. I've been recording every interaction, turning a disaster into a social study opportunity. Chef Ron had completely abandoned any pretense of being busy in the kitchen and now stood at the doorway, his mustache quivering with excitement. Monsieur, have Snoop Dogg critiquing my soufflé? About that, Max began, recalling his earlier comments about the soufflé and feeling a fresh wave of shame. Actually, it's delicious, Snoop remarked, taking another bite, though he added, I must admit, ketchup would have been an interesting addition. The joke elicited a nervous giggle from Anna, which she immediately tried to stifle with a cough. Max, on the other hand, felt the world spinning around him. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, probably his sister frantically trying to warn him about who his customer was. Mr. Dogg, Mr. Thompson tried again. Please allow us to make amends in some way. Dinner is on the house. And miss the pleasure of using my card after all the comments about my supposed budget limits? Snoop smiled, pulling out the black card he had shown earlier. That would be anticlimactic. Speaking of service, Chef Ron interjected, Max, mon ami, perhaps you could put in a good word for us at the label for corporate events. Ron, Max replied with a grin, after the way I treated your most important customer, I think you owe me a few favors. The laughter continued as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Max pulled out his phone to find dozens of unread messages from his family. I think I should call my mom, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Use my office, Mr. Thompson offered. And Max, he added, I'm sorry for all the times I scolded you for being too direct with customers. Clearly, you knew something I didn't. As Max stepped away to make the most important call of his life, Snoop addressed the remaining staff. Do you know why I really hired him? He asked, staring at the last drops of coffee in his cup. not just for his honesty. It's his ability to see through pretension in a world where everyone is trying to be something they're not. Someone who can point out the truth of it when it's uncomfortable is invaluable. Anna gathered the last of the champagne glasses and the recordings. What will you do with them? I'll keep them, Snoop replied with a smile, as a reminder that sometimes the best ideas come from the most unexpected places. And maybe someday, when Max is presenting in a boardroom, I'll play them just to see his face. In Mr. Thompson's office, Max was finishing telling his mother the news, tears streaming freely down his face as he listened to her joyful sobs on the other end of the line. "Mom," he said through his tears, "you won't have to worry about the bills anymore, and Maria can finish college. Everything's going to be okay." When he returned to the dining room, he found someone had improvised a sign that read, "From waiter to executive, a Hollywood tale." "It's a bit much," Max remarked. "Oh, you haven't seen anything yet," Snoop replied. "Wait until the media finds out. Waiter insults Snoop Dogg and lands label job. The headlines write themselves." "About that," Mr. Thompson interjected. "Should we prepare a press release?" "Let it be," Snoop said. "Some stories are better told naturally. Besides," he added, glancing at Max, "I think my new communications advisor would prefer to keep it authentic." The sun was high in the sky by the time farewells began. The morning shift employees arrived, bewildered to find an impromptu celebration in progress. "Under your chitsa, chef," Esip said, handing Max a package. "The recipe for my soufflé, for when you need to impress at corporate dinners." "Thanks, chef," Max replied, "though I think my way of impressing people is a bit different now." As Snoop prepared to leave, he paused beside Max. "First meeting on Monday at 9 o'clock, he said. "And Max, keep that brutal honesty. Just maybe tone down the comments on my French pronunciation." "No promises," Max replied with a grin. "After all, you hired me for my candor." And so, as the Los Angeles sun illuminated a new day, in the most unexpected places and in the most improbable ways, brutal honesty can open doors we never knew existed, even if it includes suggesting ketchup for a $120 steak.